It had always been the same. For years, I had been the one who took care of things. I was the one who sent money home, the one who covered bills when they came in, the one who made sure my parents never wanted for anything. I thought it was my responsibility. I thought it was just what children did for their parents. After all, they had given me everything when I was growing up, so I owed them, right? But on one particular morning, everything changed. I had been hearing murmurs from my mom and dad about a trip. Just a little getaway, they said. A family trip. The word stuck with me, but I didn't think much of it at first. It was normal for them to talk about taking a break, and sometimes my sister would join. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that this time was different. It was a getaway that didn't include me. That morning, as I was scrolling through social media, I saw a picture on my sister's profile. A photo of her with my parents, all smiling in front of a picturesque beachside resort. My heart sank as I looked at the date and realized that the trip they had been discussing, the one I had been excluded from, was happening now. My parents had used the money I sent to pay for their vacation, and I wasn't even invited. No mention, no text, nothing. I felt my stomach drop as the realization hit me like a wave. All those years of helping them, sacrificing my own wants to make sure they were comfortable, and this was the result. They had used the money I gave them for something that I wasn't even a part of. I felt like a fool. I had given them so much over the years. I had always believed that this was what you did for family. I made sure their bills were paid on time, bought gifts for birthdays and holidays, even when it meant going without things I wanted for myself. I had always been the responsible one, the one they could rely on. I was the one who made sure they didn't have to worry about money, and yet I had been left out in the cold. Why hadn't they told me? Why hadn't they thought to include me, even after everything I had done for them? My own sister had been on that trip, smiling and laughing with our parents, while I was left to sit at home, with no idea what was really going on. I wasn't angry at first. No, the anger came much later. What I felt in that moment was a deep, aching sense of betrayal. It was like being stabbed in the back by people I loved. People the first had spent my entire life taking care of. How could they do this to me? The more I thought about it, the more the truth became clear. They hadn't just excluded me from a trip. They had excluded me from their lives in a way that cut deeper than I could have imagined. They had taken advantage of my generosity, used me without any real thought to what I wanted, what I needed. I wasn't just hurt, I was devastated. And yet, despite the sting of betrayal, I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I had been conditioned to be silent, to let things slide, to pretend everything was fine when it wasn't. I had always been the quiet one, the one who kept my emotions buried deep inside, the one who didn't speak up. But this time, it was different. I stared at the picture on my sister's profile for a long time. The smiles in that photo felt like a slap to the face. They didn't care about me. They never had. And as I sat there, letting the hurt wash over me, I realized something. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep giving everything to people who didn't appreciate me, people who only saw me as a means to an end. Something had to change. It wasn't just about the trip. It was about everything. The years of giving without receiving, the feeling of being invisible in my own family. For the first time in a long time, I knew I had to do something. I had to stop pretending. I had to stop being the person they took for granted. But what they didn't know is what I planned to do next. Looking back, I could see the signs everywhere. All the little moments that I had brushed aside, thinking they were nothing, now seemed so clear. How could I have been so blind? As a child, I was always the responsible one, the one who kept things together. My sister, on the other hand, was the one who always seemed to get the special treatment. She was the favorite, the one who got attention, praise, and love from our parents. Growing up, I remember feeling like I was the backup, always second in line. I was the one who did the heavy lifting while she got the glory. It wasn't that I hated her. Far from it. I loved my sister. But I couldn't help but notice how she always got the easier path. She got the new clothes, the extra attention when she needed it, and she was always included in everything. But when it came to the important things, the decisions, the responsibilities, I was the one left to deal with it all. I was the one who had to handle everything without being asked, without ever hearing the words thank you. When our parents were struggling, it was always me who stepped in. I was the one who helped them financially when they were behind on bills, the one who made sure they had enough to eat. My sister? She lived her life without a care in the world. She never had to worry about money or stress about the future. She could afford to go out with her friends, enjoy her weekends, and never once did she stop to think about what I was doing behind the scenes. And that was just it, wasn't it? I was always behind the scenes, working, taking care of things, but never being seen, never acknowledged. It wasn't that my parents didn't love me, they did. But it felt like I was always just there to fill in the gaps when they needed something. Never the one to be celebrated. Always just a part of the background. Never the center of their world. I remember one particular incident that stands out. It was my birthday, and I had been looking forward to it all month. I had never asked for much, never expected grand gifts or extravagant celebrations. All I wanted was to feel like I mattered, to be treated as though I was important. But that day, I woke up to the sound of my parents talking in the kitchen, discussing some issue with my sister. There was no mention of my birthday. No one came to wish me well. They were too busy with their own lives to remember the one day that was supposed to be for me. When I finally walked into the kitchen, my mom looked at me and quickly said, "Oh, happy birthday, honey." There was no warmth in her voice, just a quick acknowledgement before she went back to talking with my sister. I stood there for a moment, the silence hanging in the air. My sister, too busy with her phone, didn't even look up. I felt invisible, like I didn't exist in that moment. That was the first time I realized something wasn't right. It was the first time I truly felt the weight of being the forgotten one, the one who worked hard but was never celebrated. And yet, I kept on. I kept giving, kept helping, kept doing everything I could to make their lives easier. As the years passed, I continued to step up, even when I felt like no one was acknowledging it. I worked hard to make sure my parents were comfortable. I sent money every month, made sure the bills were paid, and made sacrifices in my own life to ensure they had what they needed. But despite all of that, I could see that my sister was still the one getting all the love. She got the trips, the gifts, the special treatment. She was the one who went on vacations with them, shared their quiet moments, while I was always the one behind the scenes. The more I thought about it, the more I realized something. It wasn't just that I was the one who was always left out, it was that I was being used. My money, my time, my energy, I was giving it all, and yet I wasn't even being seen. My parents, who I had worked so hard to care for, were using the very money I sent them to go on trips with my sister, leaving me out in the cold. When I saw that photo of them on social media, smiling on their vacation without me, it was like a punch to the gut. I felt the weight of all those years of giving, all those years of being the one they relied on, only to be left behind. It wasn't just the trip that hurt, it was everything that had led up to it. All the times I had been invisible in my own family. For a long time, I tried to convince myself that it didn't matter, that it was just a trip, just a little thing. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just that. It was the culmination of years of feeling like I didn't matter. It was the final straw. And yet, I still didn't say anything. I stayed silent, like I always did. I didn't argue, didn't confront them, didn't even show my hurt. I just kept it all inside, like I had always done. But now, I couldn't stay silent anymore. I couldn't just keep giving without being acknowledged. Something had to change. I had stayed silent for years. But this time, I couldn't anymore. I had to do something. I had to make them see me. I had to stop being the one who was always there but never seen. This time I would fight back. The quiet rage that had been simmering for years finally started to bubble to the surface. It wasn't something I had planned. It wasn't some big, dramatic decision I made overnight. It was more of a slow realization. I could no longer continue to live like this, quietly watching my family ignore me, using me, while I stood by, always the second choice, the backup. It wasn't just that I was excluded from their plans. It was the fact that they took everything I gave and still didn't care. It was the feeling of being invisible, of being so easily discarded despite my sacrifices. This time, I wasn't going to stay silent. This time, I was going to make them see me. I remember the first time I truly stood up for myself. It was subtle, almost small in comparison to what I'd been through. It wasn't about raising my voice, yelling at them, or making a scene. It was about reclaiming my space, my dignity. It was about saying no for the first time. It started with something as simple as my sister asking me to babysit her kids for the umpteenth time. She'd always relied on me for help, expecting me to drop everything and take care of her responsibilities. And I always did, no questions asked. But this time, I said no. When she asked, I looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I said, I can't. I'm not going to do it. Her eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment, there was a brief silence. I could see her trying to process it. She wasn't used to me saying no. For years, I had been the one who just went along with whatever they asked of me. Why? She asked, her voice tinged with confusion. You've always helped before. What's different now? I didn't even answer her directly. Instead, I simply looked her in the eyes and said, I've been helping everyone for years, and I'm done. You can handle this one on your own. Her face fell, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something guilt maybe, but she quickly masked it with annoyance, brushing it off with a forced smile. Fine, she muttered before walking away. And just like that, something had shifted. I wasn't the person they could walk all over anymore. That moment felt like a small victory, but in reality, it was the first step toward a larger transformation. I started doing this more often. I began saying no to the small things, refusing to always be there when they needed me. I stopped answering their calls immediately, stopped jumping in to solve their problems without being asked. It wasn't about being cruel, it was about setting boundaries, about protecting myself for once. But it wasn't just the everyday interactions that were changing. I began to realize that my entire relationship with my family needed to change. I wasn't going to continue living in their shadow, in their expectation of me being the invisible support system. I deserved to be seen. I deserved to be appreciated. One day, after I had told my parents that I couldn't make it to yet another family gathering they had planned without even bothering to invite me personally, something clicked. I remember my mom's voice on the phone trying to convince me to come. She said, It's just a small get-together. Don't be like that. It's family. And there it was again. It's family. I used to think that was enough. I used to think that just being family meant that I was supposed to show up, to give, to be the one that everyone relied on. But now I realize that family wasn't about being used. It was about respect, about mutual care. I finally snapped. Not in anger, but with calm resolve. Mom, I'm done, I said, my voice steady, but firm. I've spent years putting everyone else's needs before mine, and it's not working for me anymore. I'm done being the one who gets forgotten, who gets treated like a backup. If you want to see me, you'll have to start treating me like I matter. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone, and I could hear her breathing softly. For the first time, I felt like I was taking control. For the first time, I didn't feel like the second choice. It wasn't about cutting them off completely, but about asserting my own worth. About not accepting scraps when I had given them everything. But something bigger was about to happen, something that would change everything. A few days later, I overheard something I wasn't supposed to hear. I had just walked into the kitchen to grab a cup of coffee when I overheard my mom talking to my sister. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but I couldn't help but catch part of their conversation. We're going to take a little trip next month. Just the two of us. You know, get away. It'll be good for us. I froze. I didn't even have to ask what they were talking about. It was the money I had been sending them every month, the money I thought was going to bills, to helping them live more comfortably, the money I had been sacrificing so much for. But they weren't using it for what I thought. No, they were planning a trip, a vacation, just the two of them. And once again, I was left out. I stood there, stunned. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. All the sacrifices, all the money I had worked so hard to send to them, all the things I had done for them, it was all being used to make their lives easier, while I was the one left behind. I didn't say anything at that moment. I didn't confront them, but I felt the anger rising inside me. The sense of betrayal was overwhelming. It wasn't just the trip, it was the fact that I had been giving, and they had taken, without ever once considering my feelings. This wasn't the first time I had been excluded from something, but this time felt different. This time, I was done. I stood in the kitchen for a few more moments, letting the anger and hurt wash over me before walking out the door. But what they didn't know was that I had already started making plans. I had been giving them everything I had, and yet they had never seen me, never seen the sacrifices I made, the love I gave without asking for anything in return. But now, I was going to make them see. I was going to stop being the silent one, the one who always gave without being noticed. This time, I was going to do something that would make them realize just what they had taken for granted. It's strange how you can be filled with so many emotions, anger, resentment, even betrayal, and yet, in that moment of realization, the feeling that overtakes everything is a quiet calm. It's as if the storm of all those emotions has settled, and what remains is just clarity. I had just overheard that conversation, my mom and sister planning a trip funded by the money I had been sending them, and yet, instead of storming into the room and confronting them right away, I felt something shift. I wasn't angry in the way I thought I would be. I was calm. More than calm, I was resolute. I knew, deep in my bones, that I couldn't keep going the way I had been. Something had to change. But I wasn't going to make the same mistake as before. I wasn't going to make some grand gesture. I wasn't going to scream at them, throw everything in their faces, and let them know how deeply they had hurt me. I had spent so many years doing that, giving them my love, my time, my money, my energy, and getting nothing in return. No more. This time, I would take a different approach. I would be calm, calculated, and strategic. I wasn't going to tell them what I was going to do. I wasn't going to ask for their permission. I wasn't going to beg for their attention. I had given enough. Now, it was time for them to see what life without me would look like. I began by taking the smallest of steps. I pulled my bank account statements from the last few months and went over them carefully. All the money I had been sending to them, week after week, month after month, the money that I had thought was going to their bills, their everyday needs, the very thing I was working so hard to provide only for it to be used for something as selfish and trivial as a vacation. I wasn't going to let that go unnoticed. I didn't confront them about it immediately. Instead, I slowly started making changes. I began transferring my savings to a new account, one that they wouldn't have access to. It wasn't that I didn't trust them, I had trusted them with everything for so long. No, this wasn't about trust anymore. This was about protecting myself. I knew that I had to cut them off, but I needed to make sure I did it carefully. I started withdrawing from family events. Every invitation they sent me, "Come over, it's just a family dinner," I declined. I didn't even offer an explanation. I didn't owe them an explanation anymore. I had spent years excusing myself, making them comfortable with my silence. But now, I wasn't going to be silent. I would let my actions speak for themselves. The hardest part wasn't saying no to them, though. The hardest part was realizing that they hadn't even noticed. They hadn't noticed the slow withdrawal, the absence from their lives. They hadn't even considered the possibility that I might be hurt, that I might be fed up with being treated like a second-class citizen in my own family. A few weeks later, they asked me to come to a family barbecue. I hadn't been to one of their gatherings in weeks. I could tell that they were beginning to wonder why I hadn't been around, but they didn't ask directly. They didn't even try to reach out with any real concern. It was more of an obligation than anything else. I thought about it for a moment. Maybe I could just go, I thought. Maybe this could be the time I showed up and pretended everything was fine. But something inside me said, no, I wasn't going to give in. I wasn't going to play the role they had written for me. I wasn't going to show up and smile while they continued to take me for granted. I texted my mom and told her I wouldn't be coming. I didn't give a reason. I didn't say I was busy. I simply said, "I'm not coming today." She replied almost immediately. "Why not? We're all family. You know, you've been missing so much lately. We miss you." Her words felt empty. Miss me for what? For being the one who always gave? The one who never asked for anything in return? The one who didn't matter until they needed something from her? I didn't respond. I didn't owe her anything anymore. I didn't owe them anything. The next few weeks were quiet. The world outside seemed to move on as it always had, but inside me, something was different. I wasn't the same person who had been desperate for their love and approval. I wasn't the same person who had begged for a seat at their table. I had finally begun to see myself as something more than just an extension of their needs. I had value. I was more than their pawn, their helper, their afterthought. And then the day came when I had to make a decision. I had to act. They didn't know it yet, but I had already started to make my move. I had been planning it for a while, and it felt like the right time. I wasn't going to keep silent anymore. They had taken from me for so long, and now it was time for me to take back control. I stood in front of my laptop, my fingers hovering over the keys. I had already written the emails, made the calls, set everything up. My hands were steady and my mind was calm. The first thing I did was transfer the majority of my money into a secure account, an account they would never have access to again. I paid off the final bills that were still tied to them and cut them off financially. It wasn't that I wanted to punish them, it was that I wanted to protect myself. I didn't owe them anything anymore. Next, I drafted an email to my lawyer, instructing them to prepare the paperwork I needed to officially separate my finances from theirs. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about taking the first step toward freeing myself from their grip. I was done being their safety net. I wasn't going to wait for their approval. I wasn't going to ask them if they understood. I wasn't going to beg them to see me. I was going to take control, and they were going to see exactly what they had been taking for granted. I hit send on the email to my lawyer and leaned back in my chair. I felt a strange mix of liberation and nervous anticipation, but I didn't regret it. I had been silent long enough. This time, it was my turn. The decision was made. It was done. I had taken control in a way I had never done before. For years, I had allowed myself to be their safety net, their invisible pillar, always present but never acknowledged. But now, I was no longer willing to live that way. The email to the lawyer had been sent, and I waited. The silence was deafening at first. There was a strange calmness that washed over me, as though I had crossed a threshold and could now finally breathe for the first time in years. But then, like a storm gathering on the horizon, I felt the change come. It started slowly. My phone buzzed with messages, a handful from my mom, a few from my sister. At first, I didn't reply. I couldn't bear to engage in the familiar, hollow conversations where I was always the one giving, the one sacrificing, the one staying silent. But as the messages kept coming, I finally opened them. "Where have you been? You haven't been responding." I scrolled past it. Another message. "You know, we've been worried about you. Why aren't you coming to family dinner anymore? We miss you." My stomach twisted with a mix of guilt and something I couldn't quite place. It wasn't that I didn't care for them, but I knew in my heart that I couldn't go back to how things were. They missed me, yes, but only because they wanted me in the same role I had always played for them. They missed the version of me that was always there, always willing to drop everything, always trying to be the one who patched up their problems. But that version of me was gone, and I wasn't sure I could ever go back. The most frustrating part of it all was their inability to see why I was doing what I was doing. I had spent years showing up for them, financially and emotionally, but the moment I just stopped showing up to their every need, they began to notice. Not because they cared about me, but because they were suddenly left without their crutch. They were panicked, scrambling, like a child searching for its mother. The text messages kept coming in, and each one felt more desperate. It wasn't concern for me, it was concern for themselves. They were used to me. They were used to my support, my money, my time. And now, they were starting to feel what it was like without it. I couldn't stand it any longer. I finally picked up my phone and responded, "I've been busy, but I need some space." That was all I said. I wasn't looking for sympathy or excuses. I wasn't going to let them guilt trip me into going back to what we had, but of course they didn't leave it at that. The phone rang and I knew exactly who it was. I hesitated for a moment, staring at the screen before picking it up. My mom's name lit up the screen. "Why aren't you answering us, honey?" "We've been trying to reach you," she said, the worry in her voice unmistakable. I could hear the familiar tone in her voice, the one I'd heard all my life. It was the same tone that had come when I was expected to give in, to soften, to go back to my old role. It was the voice I had known too well, a voice that had once made me cave in and drop everything. "I'm not coming back," I said, my voice steady and calm. There was no emotion, no sign of weakness, just flat, unwavering resolve. "I've made my decision." "What are you talking about?" Her voice faltered for a moment, the realization that I wasn't playing the game anymore hitting her like a cold wave. "I'm done," I continued. "I've been giving for so long, and it's never enough. I've been nothing but a safety net for you, and I can't keep doing this." There was silence on the other end. I could hear her breathing heavily, unsure of how to respond. My words were cutting through all the guilt they had laid on me for so many years. and now they didn't know how to handle it. You've been giving to us all your life, and now you're just walking away? She said, her voice rising slightly. We are your family, and this is how you repay us? I wasn't surprised by her reaction. She always twisted everything, turning the blame on me for not being there enough, for not doing more. But I couldn't be manipulated anymore. Not this time. Repay you? I repeated, incredulous. I've been repaying you for years, and what have I gotten in return? The same old disrespect. I'm not playing this game anymore. Is this about money? She asked, and her tone was softer, as if she were trying to understand but failing miserably. If you need more, we can talk about it. No, Mom, I cut in, shaking my head even though she couldn't see me. It's not about money, it's about respect. It's about seeing me as something more than just someone who funds your life. I'm done being treated like that. The silence on the other end of the line was thick. I waited. She didn't know how to respond. And that's when I knew, for the first time in my life, I had said the right thing. The thing I should have said all those years ago. The next few days were a blur. I continued withdrawing from the family. I stopped picking up calls. I didn't answer their texts. I stopped giving. The hardest part was that I was finally forcing myself to stop pretending, to stop playing the role they had carved out for me. And it was liberating. But it was also painful. Because I had spent so many years doing what I thought was right. I had always believed that I was doing the right thing, that this was what family did. But now I was starting to realize that family wasn't about sacrifice at the expense of your own happiness. A week passed. My phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't just my mom or sister reaching out. It was an email from the bank. The transfer of funds, the one I had set up in a new account for myself, had been processed. It was the first step in cutting them off completely. My savings were now mine alone. That afternoon, my sister called. I hesitated for a moment, then picked up. Why are you doing this? She asked, her voice soft but sharp with hurt. We don't understand. What do you want us to do? I didn't answer right away. I let the silence fill the air. Then I spoke, quietly but firmly. I want you to see me. To see me for who I am, not just what I can give you. But I don't think you can do that, and that's why I have to walk away. Her words hung in the air, unfinished. She didn't know how to respond. Neither of us did. It was over. The game was over. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel like I was wrong. I felt free. The days following my decision were strange. There was a heavy silence, as if the world around me had stopped. The sound of my own heartbeat seemed louder, clearer. It was a new kind of stillness, the kind that comes after a storm, when the air feels crisp and the world has been wiped clean. But unlike the peace I had hoped for, I felt a tension growing between me and the people I had loved for so long. The first crack in the facade came when my mom texted me again. It was a simple, straight-to-the-point message. We need to talk. I didn't respond immediately. What was there left to say? I had already said everything I needed to say, and I knew she wouldn't listen, not really. She only wanted to maintain the illusion that everything was fine, that I could just keep playing my part, doing what I had done for years. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. Over the next few days, the messages kept coming. A few from my mom, but more from my sister, filled with concern and frustration. The first was a simple question, why are you avoiding us? The next was an accusation, what's gotten into you? This isn't like you. They were concerned, of course, but in their own way. It wasn't about me, not really. It was about the role I used to play in their lives, about the money I used to give, the support I used to offer. Without me, their world seemed off balance. It was that simple. It had nothing to do with how I was feeling or what I needed. I let them stew in their own confusion for a while. Then, one evening, my sister called. It was late, and the sound of her voice on the other end of the line felt different, raw. Like she wasn't sure what to say but couldn't hold it back any longer. Are you really done with all of us? She asked, her voice trembling. What do you want from us then? I could hear the desperation in her words, the tone that said she didn't fully understand why I was doing this. But I did. I understood perfectly. I don't want anything from you, I said, the words calm but heavy with finality. I've spent my life trying to make everyone happy, and you've never asked if I was happy. I just want to live my life for me now. I can't keep doing this. There was a pause. The silence between us felt like a chasm, and I could hear her trying to find the words. The disappointment, the hurt, it was all there, but I wasn't backing down. "You're being selfish," she finally said. "You've always been the one we could count on. And now you're just leaving. Don't you care about us anymore?" The sting of her words hit harder than I expected. Of course I cared. I had always cared. But caring had never meant being a doormat, never meant sacrificing my own happiness just to keep the peace. For once, I wasn't willing to let her guilt trip me into playing that role again. "Being there for you doesn't mean I have to lose myself in the process," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. "I've been lost for too long, and I can't keep pretending that I'm okay. This is the only way I can take care of myself." The words hung in the air for a long time, and for a brief moment, I thought she might understand. But then she spoke again, this time with a sharp edge in her voice. "You've changed," she said. "I don't know who you are anymore." I stayed silent. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to apologize for taking control of my own life. This was the consequence, I realized. The price of standing up for myself was this. The people I loved might never understand. They might resent me. They might even hate me. But in that moment, I realized something important. I couldn't keep living for them. It was time to live for me. The next few days were a blur of emotions. I went to work, came home, spent time in the quiet of my apartment. But no matter how much I tried to settle into my new routine, there was an unsettling feeling hanging over me, like a shadow that wouldn't go away. It was as if the family I had known for so long was slipping through my fingers. And with each message, each call, the distance between us grew. It was clear that my decision to stop giving had shaken them to their core. But they didn't know how to fix it. They didn't know how to deal with me standing up for myself, for setting boundaries. I had always been the one to give, to help, to provide. Now that I was no longer doing that, they were forced to confront the reality that they had been taking me for granted all along. A week after the phone call with my sister, my mom showed up at my door. I didn't know how to feel about it. Part of me wanted to slam the door in her face, to keep the distance that I knew was necessary. But another part of me, one I hadn't fully let go of yet, wanted to open the door and let her back in. But I didn't. I stayed calm as I looked at her, standing on the doorstep, her face tired and drawn. She held out a small box, a peace offering, I suppose. But I didn't take it. I couldn't. "I came to apologize," she said, her voice softer now. "I know you've been through a lot, and I didn't understand. I'm sorry for the way things have been." I looked at her, at the woman who had never really seen me, who had never acknowledged my sacrifices. And in that moment, I realized that this apology wasn't for me. It was for her own peace of mind. "I'm not the same person I was before," I said, my voice steady but cold. "I can't go back to being the person you wanted me to be. I found a new version of myself, and I'm not going to let you pull me back into that old life." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel sympathy. I didn't feel the need to console her. I had been so used to being the one to comfort her, to smooth over the cracks in our relationship. But I wasn't that person anymore, and I wasn't going to apologize for that. She didn't say anything more. She left, and I watched her walk away, the distance between us growing even further. The days that followed were a strange mix of relief and sadness. I no longer felt the burden of their expectations weighing me down. But at the same time, I had to come to terms with the fact that I had lost something I could never get back. The family I had once been a part of was now just a memory, a version of them that no longer existed in my life. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel sad either. What I felt was free. For the first time in years, I was finally able to breathe. But it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy to cut ties, to sever the bond that had been there for so long. But I had to. I had to protect myself. And in doing so, I had found something I hadn't realized I was missing: peace. It's funny how life works. The first few days after I made that decision, I thought it would be the hardest thing I'd ever do. I expected to feel regret, to second-guess myself, and to long for things to go back to how they were. But that didn't happen. In fact, what followed was a sense of freedom that I hadn't felt in years. At first, I didn't understand why. Why wasn't I feeling the weight of guilt or doubt? After all, I had spent so many years prioritizing my family's needs over my own. I had always been the one to give, to be there for everyone, no matter what it cost me. I had sacrificed my happiness, my own dreams, just to make sure they were okay. And yet, here I was, alone, finally starting to live for myself. No more trying to please others, no more bending over backward to fix things for them, no more carrying the weight of their expectations. For the first time in my life, I could just exist without the constant pressure of being the perfect daughter, the reliable sibling, the person who always had to do what they needed. But with this newfound freedom came a deeper realization. It wasn't just about walking away, it was about choosing me. I had spent my whole life chasing approval, seeking validation from people who would never truly see me for who I was. It wasn't until I broke free that I realized I had been asking for love in all the wrong places. I had always been looking for someone else to love me, to accept me, to give me permission to take care of myself. But what I needed all along was to love myself, to accept my own worth, and to stop letting others dictate my value. The silence in my apartment was different now. It wasn't lonely, it was peaceful. There were no more arguments, no more tears, no more trying to explain myself. There was only the quiet hum of contentment as I began to carve out a life that was truly mine. I started doing things for myself. I took up yoga, something I'd always wanted to try but never had the time for. I started reading books I had neglected, filling my days with things that brought me joy. I took long walks through the park, enjoying the calm of the mornings, breathing in the fresh air without the constant weight of guilt. I didn't need a fancy vacation or grand gestures to feel fulfilled anymore. I didn't need anyone's approval. I had found my peace in the small moments, the quiet mornings with a cup of coffee, the books I devoured, the music I listened to as I worked. There was still the occasional phone call from my family. My mom tried to reach out a few times, and even my sister sent me a message once, telling me that they missed me. But the more they reached out, the more I realized I was never going to be the person they wanted me to be. And that was okay. I didn't need them to accept the changes I had made. I had already accepted them myself. The truth was, I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't resentful. I didn't harbor any ill will toward them. I simply didn't need them in the way I once did. They had their place in my life, but it wasn't the central role they used to occupy. I had learned that my happiness couldn't be tied to their approval. My worth wasn't measured by how much I could give or how much I could sacrifice for others. Looking back, I saw the years of sacrifice differently. I realized that everything I had given to them wasn't something I needed to hold on to anymore. Those sacrifices had shaped me, yes, but they didn't define me. I was more than just the person who always gave. I was someone who deserved to receive. I deserved to take care of myself, to love myself, and to live for myself. And so I did. I chose peace. I chose to let go of the past and stop letting it control my future. I chose to live a life where I didn't have to prove myself to anyone. I was enough just as I was. In the end, it wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about getting back at anyone. It was about finding my own sense of purpose, my own strength, and my own peace. And that, in itself, was the best kind of revenge I could have ever imagined. I still see my family sometimes. We don't talk as much as we used to, but when we do, it's different. It's not the same as it was before, and I'm okay with that. They're not the center of my world anymore, but they don't need to be. I've built a life that makes sense to me, one where I am in control, and one where I am finally free. I've learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who see your worth, the people who truly love and appreciate you for who you are. And I've come to realize that sometimes the best way to love someone is from a distance. I don't need their approval to be happy. I don't need to beg for their affection. What I need is to keep walking this path that I've chosen, to keep building the life that is mine without feeling like I owe anyone anything. And as I stand here, looking back at everything that has happened, I know this. I am stronger now. I am free. And that's more than enough for me.